So how do you install a bridge anyway? Welcome back to Addicted to Gear. If you guys are thinking about building your own project guitar, one of the questions you may have asked yourself is how do you install a bridge properly? So in today's video, I'm going to take you step by step. We're going to be hopping over to my messy workbench once again, and I'm going to be explaining to you exactly how to install a bridge properly on a Telecaster build. Now, hopefully you guys have been watching all of the videos that I've produced that have led up to this stage in the build, because there's a lot of useful information that I'm sharing with you in those videos. If you have not watched those videos already, take a moment, go back into my archive and take a look at those videos, because I think they're really required watching if you're going to be building your own guitar, and I take you through every single critical step in the process. So without further ado, let's go over to my messy workbench so I can show you how to get a Telecaster bridge properly installed. We're at the stage now where the neck has been worked on already. We've done 4 videos on the neck prep. We've basically carved the paddle headstock into the appropriate shape. We've installed the tuners. We've done a fret level, and we also made sure that the back of the neck is perfectly silky smooth, and I have videos on all those. So if you haven't already seen those and you're jumping into this video specifically as the first one, you might want to take a couple of minutes and go back and watch those so that you're up to speed with what we've done so far. So now that the neck is ready, many people would automatically say, okay, well, the next step would be to install the neck into the body. Well, I don't usually use that approach, and I'll explain why. It's easy to do that at this stage, but I consider that to be a mistake, because you want to make sure that the bridge is installed in the guitar first. Now, the bridge here is just sitting here. We haven't actually drilled any of the holes for it yet. These holes came pre-drilled on the body, and this body comes from Guitar Anatomy. It's a beautiful body. As you can see, I already shielded all the cavities, and I extended the shielding here so that it'll make good contact with the bottom of the bridge that we're going to be using for this build. Now, that being said, the next step, in my opinion, should be centering the bridge and basically drilling the holes, making sure everything is aligned perfectly on the body before you install the neck. Because if you mess up the bridge, it's a lot more painful to fix than if you have to slightly shift the neck when you attach it to the body. This is quite doable. This is a pain. So what I like to do at this point is make sure everything is centered on the body. Hence the tape that I have here. So I'll explain what I've done so far. I've taken some masking tape and basically taped it down to where I think the center of the body line is. And then I also extended a couple of pieces of masking tape here along the edges of the neck, and that is just so I can follow the left and right edge of the neck and use it as a guide. So basically I have a wall here. I use the rightmost line of that tape as a guide. On this side I use the leftmost side as a guide, and then I have this center tape here. So what I did was I used a ruler. You can also use a caliper if you have one, and I measured the inside walls of the neck here, and it's 55 millimeters. So once I have the measurement, which was 55 millimeters, I divided that by 2, and I basically mark the center point of the neck pocket on the tape. Then I moved down to the bridge location here, and I took the center point of these holes that are basically drilled for the strings to go through the body, and I took the center point between these 2 holes and marked that down. And then I drew the line. I extended that point all the way through to that point, and then all the way down, all the way to the back of the guitar. I do that because that also helps me locate the drill hole point where I'm going to be putting in the strap the strap button there. So now this line represents the exact center point of the guitar body, and that's going to be your reference when you're installing the bridge. So the next step would be to place the bridge inside the guitar. You want to make sure that the wires are all tucked neatly underneath. It's kind of difficult to do this with one hand, but you want to make sure that the bridge is flat on the guitar body. Just placing it in the cavity does not ensure that the bridge is actually centered. As you can see, I can move it quite a bit, and it's not going to necessarily be centered with anything. So what you're going to want to do at this point is you're going to want to use the screw holes that are drilled in the bridge as well as the body as your guide. So I'll show you how I do that. Okay, as you can see here, we have these holes that are drilled into the bottom of the bridge. That is where the strings are going to go down through the body and basically line up with the string ferrules that you have on the other side. This is because this guitar is a through body design. You can also put strings here, but that would be top mounted. I prefer to go through the body. We're going to line up these holes and make sure that they all line up perfectly. And the way I like to do that is to use some skewers. Now, if you have access to skewers, either the same kind of barbecue skewers you would use, you know, to throw things on the grill. I can't tell you how many times these things have helped me out on a guitar build. I highly recommend you go out and buy yourself a pack, have them lying around, or put them in your toolbox, because you will use them eventually. So basically, I took 2 of these, cut them down, and what I like to do is just shove them down into the holes on the right and left and center up the bridge. This way, once they're in there, the bridge can't really shift all that much, and the holes are going to be pretty much lined up. The next step would be to drill out the holes that will accommodate the screws that will basically hold the bridge in place. These screws right here. So these screws will go into the top larger holes. There's 4 of them. And how do we make sure that these screws are drilled perfectly centered? Before we actually look at drilling the holes, we want to check one more thing, and that is that the holes on the back side of these things are also lined up with that line that we drew. So I'm trying to hold the camera as centered as I can. And what we're trying to see here, if you sight down this line, we want to make sure that it's perfectly centered with the center screw, as well as perfectly centered between those 2 holes in the center of the bridge. And that will ensure that this bridge is now lined up with the line that we drew that goes all the way back there to the center of the neck pocket, and we shouldn't have any issues. So in order to get these screws in properly and centered, I highly recommend you guys get a special tool. It's not very expensive, it's worth every penny. The tool that I'm talking about is one of these. This is a hinge bit that is basically designed to be able to center the screw holes when you're installing door hinges. Seems silly, but it's worth its weight in gold. This thing works so well, you wouldn't even believe how much of a game changer it is. If you've ever tried to drill a hole by hand and get it centered in a larger hole, it's almost impossible. It's really difficult. The way it basically works is that the top portion of this, when you press down on the bit, goes down and exposes the drill bit. And this little flange or chamfer here is where all the magic happens, because this will center a hole every time. So basically, you would take this, go to your drill press, make sure you're using a drill press if you can, and then these 2 chamfers line up perfectly. I don't know if you can see that there. And the hole will be dead center every time. And because we have the shielding tape right underneath the screws there, it's also going to make an additional touch point to make sure all the shielding is touching the bridge. If you try to do this by hand with a regular drill, you can still do it, but I would try and use a drill press because you'll make sure that it's going in perfectly straight every time.
The screws we're going to be using here are actually longer than the extension of the drill bit, so there's no worries about going too deep into the body. And the drill that we're using here, the bit that we're using, is actually smaller than the diameter of these screws. So what I like to do is I'll drill the first hole with this, and that'll be the pilot hole. And then I'll use a slightly larger drill bit to just go a little bit wider, so I don't risk cracking the paint or, causing any cracks in the body. For those of you that have a drill press that's rather small like I do, you might have trouble getting the drill press to reach this point because your body will hit the back shaft of the drill press. So you'll have no choice but to use a handheld drill, and it's not the end of the world as long as you try and be as straight as possible. So I hope you can see how nicely centered those holes are. That little tool does an amazing job. Like I said, highly recommend you get one of those. It costs about $8, worth every penny. Now that the holes are drilled, we will follow up those holes with slightly larger ones to accommodate the screws. But I'm not going to bother doing that right now because before we can install the bridge, we actually have to do the wiring. So I'm going to install the wiring, the switch, the output jack, and wire up both of the pickups on the pick guard. We still have the holes to drill on the pick guard as well. We'll do that too. And the last step in the process will be to install the neck in the guitar and make sure that the neck is aligned and all the strings are perfect on the guitar. So onwards and upwards, we're going to be continuing this series with the wiring for the guitar, and I'm going to show you how easy that is, especially if you have a partially wired control jack already for the project. It's a lot simpler, but I'll show you how I go about doing all of that. So that's it, guys. That's how you make sure that your bridge is perfectly centered on your guitar.
So I hope this video helped demystify some of the questions around how to install a bridge on a Telecaster project guitar build for you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to assist you and give you more information if you should need it. In the meantime, stay tuned for the following videos that we're going to be putting together on this project build as we get closer to the light at the end of the tunnel. At the end of the build, I will showcase the guitar in its full glory, and I'll take you through all of the sounds and make you see the final results and hear the final results of the build. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already subscribed to Addicted to Gear, what are you waiting for? Hit the little bell icon so you'll be notified of all the great content we put together for you and upload every week right here on Addicted to Gear. That's it for now, guys. See you soon.